Okay, welcome to the video. Sig Guy here. In this video I'm going to show you how you can change out your trigger in your CZ. Today I'm going to be installing the Armored Craft dual adjustable trigger. They just released this not too long ago, and I'm going to be installing it in my CZ75 SP-01. So with that, let's get started. So before we get started, just a couple things. First, if you can hear the background noise, the 3D printers are running. I apologize. I got a lot of printing that I'm trying to get caught up on. Secondly, the details and everything on the trigger, product details, they change all the time. So rather than putting the details in the video and then the video getting outdated, what I'm going to start doing from now on is just referring people to the product description on the website. I'm selling these on sigguy.com. So if you just look in the description there, it'll give you all the important details and answer most of your questions pertaining to this trigger here, okay? As far as tools, just your basic tools, pins, punches, picks, hammers, whatever you're going to use to take your grip panels off. I do offer toolkits on my website, sigguy.com, and this pick comes in the deluxe kit and a couple other kits, as well as punches and everything that are very helpful in doing this job on the CZ. So I basically recommend to people watch my videos from beginning to end, and then if there's some tools or something that I left out in the beginning but I'm using it towards the end, then you can make note of that and make sure that you have whatever it is before you do the job. Nothing's worse than getting halfway through the job and not having the tools to complete it. So with that, let's move forward and start taking apart the CZ and getting the trigger installed. The first thing we're always going to do when we're working on firearms is make sure we're working on a clear and safe firearm. So the first thing we're going to do, if you got a magazine installed, remove your magazine, set that to the side. We're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to physically and visually check to make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine. Check our breech face, look away, do the same thing again. Chamber, magazine, breech face. We are working on a safe and clear firearm. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove our slide from our frame. In order to do that, there's a notch here on our slide. A little line cut in here, and there's a matching one on our frame here. We need to line up those two notches like this, and then from this side here we're going to push our slide stop out. So you can either use your base pad, or I just used the nylon end of my armorer's hammer here. Okay, so basically line those notches up just like that. Come over to this side, give it a little tap, and we just pull the slide stop right out of there, and then we can remove our slide. Next, I'm going to use the T20 and remove my grip panels. Well, one screw on each side. Set that aside, and we'll do the same over here. Next, I'm going to be kind of disassembling the stuff in this area here, and I apologize in advance. Typically work on SIGs and stuff like that, so if some of the terminology is a little bit different with the CZ, I apologize. Like they call this a mainspring plug, I believe. I've called it a mainspring seat, but everybody knows what we're talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my magazine guide, this thin piece of metal right here. It's very flexible. It's just in a notch back here, so we can kind of just bend it out towards us and get it out of that notch. And then there's just one pin here that it hinges on, so we're going to remove that pin. I got a 16th punch here. Just going to push that pin out. Just like that. I'll set that aside. And then the magazine guide will set that aside as well. Now, when this goes in, it goes in just like that. Okay, this rolled steel part towards the rear, and they're just like that. What I strongly suggest is, I always take like a video, especially if I'm going to get into like the trigger and stuff like that, like right in here, and there's a lot of parts and pieces in there. I'll take my camera, my phone, and I'll take real slow video all around it, all different angles like this, you know, and then that way if I have a problem putting stuff back together, like which way did it go in there, you know, this way, that way, upside down, left, right, I can just refer to the video. I can pause it, zoom in on it, and it's extremely helpful, and it eliminates a lot of that guesswork when putting stuff back together. So that's a excellent idea. Very first thing you do before you start taking anything apart. Okay. Next, I'm going to remove my mainspring seat here. So this is just held in right now by this pin. Once I remove that pin, it's going to come out. So depending on how strong your hands are, you can kind of just push in on this, and like my pin's are already falling out. Or you can use like an armorer's block. Set this right on the armorer's block, and then I got a 3/32 punch here. We can just push that right through, just like that. Set our pin to the side, and then be careful when we pull our punch out because it is under spring tension. I'm going to put my finger over it just like this, remove my punch, relieve the tension, and then we'll pull that plug out. We'll set that aside right here, and then our main spring. Alright, so next I'm going to remove the manual safety. Okay, this is ambi, one on each side. And this side here goes through, there's a rod that goes through, and then it goes through the lever on this side. Okay, so we slide this side out, it's going to come out with the rod. This side's going to stay there. And it's captured by this spring right here. Okay, we need to lift this spring up and slide it over and lay it right up here. Now what I've noticed is some people have a notch in this part here, which when they put that spring up into there, it stays put. Mine does not. If you look at it wrong, it'll plop right back down inside here. Okay, so just take a lot of patience. I usually use my sear screwdriver, sear spring screwdriver, and get in like this, and then slide it up and put it over here. Alright, so as you can see, I got the little spring up on that ledge. I got to kind of hold mine, like I said, because mine doesn't have the little notch there to hold it. And then all I do is I take my nylon hammer and just give this post a little tap, right like that. The post that comes through this lever right here. Okay, what that did is you can see it popped out my safety on this side. So we're just going to pull that straight through just like that. Next, I'm going to remove my safety on this side. So there's no pin holding our ejector in anymore. So make sure that we don't tip this upside down, all that stuff, because you don't really want it to fall out. So I'm just going to kind of put my, you can see it's popping out right now. I'm going to put my finger over that. Our safety, we're just going to rotate that up to about 12 o'clock, and then you'll be able to pull it right out the side. It's got a flat on the one side, and you can see how there's a channel all the way around it. This detent right here, it rides inside that channel. It's basically what captures it. So we got to rotate it to the 12 o'clock to where there is no ridge, and it'll slide right by there. Okay. So now I'm going to remove my ejector. This is the ejector housing, I'm going to call it. Basically, this is our ejector right here. Okay, that's all self-contained, all the pieces in there. We got to really worry about anything falling out of there. The next step is going to be to remove the detents for the manual safety. There's 3 components here. We have this little detent here on the right-hand side. We have one on the left-hand side, right here. And then the little spring behind it, okay? So this is a good time to grab your phone and take video, all different angles around this whole area. So that way when you go to put it back together, you can pause it, zoom in on it, and then you can see the correct orientation of these parts on how they go back in, because they only go in one way. And it's very hard to see on video sometimes, like when you're watching on YouTube, because it's not as clear as the video you're going to be able to take on your phone, okay? So I'm just going to grab a pick, and I'm going to get that part out, and then the other 2 parts out. So I'm going to get in here with my pick. I'll pull this one out. Grab my tweezers and grab that. Just like that. Very small piece, alright? And the way that this is going to go back in, basically it's got like a shark fin up top. That's going to be up top, and if you can see, it's towards this side. Okay, the shark fin is going to be up and pointed in. Okay, that's the way that one goes in. Magnetic tray is a pretty good idea with small parts like this as well. And I'm going to go on this side here, basically do the same thing. So there's the one for the left side, Same thing. We got the little spring. You have a little like shark fin up top here. So that's towards the inside, facing up. Next, we're going to remove our hammer. This is the pivot pin. In order to remove the pivot pin, on this side here, it's actually starting to slide out already. There's a retaining peg. Okay, this slides straight up. And you're going to see it right here. Okay, that detent spring is what keeps that from falling out of place. So I'm just going to grab my magnet and grab that pin right up and out of there. And then our hammer pivot pin will come out towards us. Just like that. I'm going to slide our hammer right up and out of there. Next, we'll remove our trigger finally. This is a trigger pivot pin right here. Yours might have a roll pin in it. You're going to have to smash that baby out. Mine's got a reusable pin. I would highly recommend getting the reusable pins. That way you can do this as many times as you want. Every time you take a roll pin out, it's recommended that you replace that roll pin. Okay. So first, before we take that pin out, my magazine catch spring screw right here. I'm going to back that off a little bit. That's going to relieve tension on my trigger bar. You can see actually how my trigger bar moves up and down when I'm loosening and tightening that. Just gives us a little bit more wiggle room in here. Okay. So now that that's loose there, I'm just going to take my 16th punch. I'm going to knock that pin through. Just like that. And then before I pull my punch out, I'm going to put my finger over here because that spring's going to, it's under tension right now. It's probably going to want to fly out of there. So there's our trigger spring. And then we can just pull this whole thing right up and out of there. So changing out our trigger itself is fairly easy. We're just going to use our punch again. Push this little pin out right here. Just like that. Remove our trigger. Grab our new Armory Craft trigger. Line up those holes. And slide our pin right back through there. Just like that. Alright, so now that we have our trigger onto our trigger bar, this is probably the most difficult step in the whole process, is getting it back in with our trigger spring. Okay, so there's a little trick here. We need a slave pin. Okay. So what I use is a toothpick. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the toothpick through this top hole on my trigger. Just like that. So it comes out the other side. It's flush with the other side. Okay, we don't really want any sticking out on the sides. So when it's there, I'm going to break it right off. Okay. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a razor blade, being very careful not to cut myself. I'm going to make that perfectly flush with that side. Okay. So there we have a perfectly usable slave pin. Because what we need to do is we need to line this up with the holes in the frame and then the holes on the trigger spring. And then when we slide our pin back through, well, good luck lining all that stuff up without a slave pin. Okay. So now that I have my slave pin, we'll let that fall out just like that. Our trigger spring goes in one way. It's going to go in just like this. This is the short leg. This is the long leg. The long leg is going to be facing up and forward. The short leg is going to be facing down and away from us. Okay? That short leg goes underneath our trigger. Oops, sorry. Underneath our trigger, right under here. The long leg's going to come out above it, just like this. Okay? So we'll put our trigger in like so. So you can see my long leg is poking up out of the trigger. The short leg is inside behind the trigger. Okay, and I can see right through the hole here. I'm going to put my slave pin in there. I usually come in through the back side. It's a little easier. So you can see my toothpick coming out through there. Just going to push down on my spring. Kind of line things up here. And get that to come out the other side. Just have patience. Just like that. Okay, so that little toothpick is holding it just like it needs to be. Now all I gotta do is just drop this in my frame and put my pin through. So next we'll grab our frame and we'll take our trigger and trigger bar assembly and drop it right down inside just like this. Okay. And then what we're lining up is we're going to line up our spring, the long leg that was facing up and out of the trigger. We're going to put that right in this notch right here. Okay. Just kind of lift up on that, move it forward, and get that right into position. Just like that. Next, I'm going to tip it on its side here, and I'm going to kind of pull and move my trigger around until I can see that toothpick, our slave pin, through this hole right here, the bottom hole. Okay, which you can see it right there. And then while holding it as steady as I can, I'm going to grab my punch, and I'm going to put it right through that hole and push my slave pin out, just like that. So now my punch is acting like a slave pin. It's got everything lined up, the trigger spring, the holes in the frame, everything. I'm going to use the regular pin, that pivot pin, to push on my slave pin and guide this through as everything's lined up. Okay, so I'll remove my pin just a little bit, enough to get my pivot pin started. And as I'm pushing that in, moving things around, keeping things lined up, give it a little tap, and then tap it all the way in. Just like that. Next, we're going to install our hammer, strut, and disconnector. Side note, I replaced my disconnector with a different one. There's a bunch of different kits you can get. Just know that, I forget which pin it is. I believe it's the strut pivot pin, because it's boogered up. It might have been this one too, because that one's brand new. One of them comes out extremely hard, where I had to get a regular household hammer and a really good punch, and went down in the basement on the floor and gave it holy hell. But it finally did come out. It's staked from the factory, so that's why it comes out really hard. It's not just like a regular pin that we've been sliding in and out through this process. So just know that I think it is the disconnector one. That one is in there, and you're going to have to work at it to get it out, but just know that that's completely normal, okay? So we're going to slide this into the hole right here, just like so. And then we'll line up the hole that goes through the hammer and the frame, just like that, here. Then we'll drop our retaining pin down in there. The big end is going to be facing us. And I'll push that all the way through. And then without tipping it over so that it falls back out like it already did on me once, we're going to grab a pair of tweezers, the other retaining pin that holds that pin in. Just going to grab it just like that. Slide this right down in that hole. Just like that. Okay, so you can see the pins in the hole right here. It's capturing our pivot pin here. Alright, so next we're going to put our manual safety detents in. Got this little one here, which is the left side. It's going to go in there just like this. Actually, my bad. It's going to go in there just like this. Spring towards the rear, the fin facing up and in. Okay. So just lay this on its side. Put that down inside there like so. Just like that. Alright, so next we're going to put the other detent in this side. This notch here. That's where it rides. And it's going to go in there just like this. This flat side is going to be facing in versus the other side. It's got kind of like a notch that rides in the groove inside here. Anyway, so it goes just like that. This fin part facing up, flat side facing in. And this is the most challenging part of this whole job, if you ask me. Getting this stupid piece back in there. So I'm going to use these pair of tweezers. I'm going to see how this works. Try to do this on camera. Just like that. Alright, now that we have both detents in there, we're going to drop our extractor assembly in there. So there's these notches here in the back. They go into the notches. Kind of goes like your FCU and your 320. Kind of drops in like that, hooks in, and then presses down in there, okay? Kind of like that. And then you can see, if you look through that hole, what do you see hanging down in that hole? That's our little spring. Remember that catcher is our manual safety that goes through there? So that's why we got to lift that up and out of there to get our manual safety back in. So before we put that in there, we're going to put the right side one on there. Remember, this has got to go about 12 o'clock position. Just like that. Then flop it down. And then we'll take our manual safety on this side. Start working that through. I'm going to move my spring up and out of the way. I know seeing on camera, I apologize. So I basically just pulled that spring up right here while I was pushing on it, and it slid in that far. And before we can go any further, just making sure that that's actually catching on. You can see it's got a flat spot here, okay? So it's indexed, keeps them both even. So I'm just making sure I'm going through the hole right now. So while I'm pushing on the side of it here, that detent that we slid inside here, if you notice before we put it in, there's a little, the fin on top, it's got a little notch in it. Okay, so we're going to use a pick. We're going to get down inside that notch. We're going to pull that detent towards the rear. And that's going to let this pop into place as we're pushing on it. Okay, so I'll get my pick in here. Pull my detent back. Just like that. You can see the notch. It's right in here. Put my pick right down in there. Pull it back as I'm pushing it on my manual safety. And that allow it to go in completely and capture it. Alright, so we are on the home stretch. Next I'm going to put in my mainspring. Just going to line everything up through the hole here. Slide it over my strut. I'm going to put my plug in. Notches facing forward. Okay, and parallel. Now, if you got strong hands, you can just push this in and throw that pin in there. It's the bigger of the two pins left. Okay, the small one is for our magazine guide. Some people turn it upside down and push down on the pistol. I'm just going to use my hands and kind of compress that. Push my pin in. It flew through the other side. Try that again. Making sure I'm level or parallel. Plug the other side so it doesn't come flying through. Just like that. Sometimes people, when they start the plug, they'll either put it on the table or kind of like press down like this on an armorer's block, and then either get a punch in there to act as a slave pin, and then put your pin in to knock the slave pin out, or just put the pin in itself. Okay. Next we'll install our magazine guide. So remember, the rolled portion faces towards the back of the pistol. Just kind of sneak this in here like this. And lining up the hole here with the hole through the guide. And we'll slide our remaining pin through there just like that. Make sure it's nice and flush. And then we're just going to take this. We're going to bend it and put it right into that notch. Just like that. Next, I'll reinstall my grips. Put those on there like that. Just get that a little snug. Same thing on this side. Okay, and before we put our slide back on, we're going to want to tighten down our magazine release spring screw, which is right here. So that interacts with our trigger bar, so we want to make sure that that is properly tightened. You ain't got to crank it down, just snug it up. It's kind of like, it's got its own little detent. You can feel it when you're turning it kind of clicking, so it's not going to back itself off, okay? So we'll just snug that down. And then we'll reinstall our slide. We're going to line up our notches, just like when we removed it. Install our slide catch. Push that in there just like that. Alright, before we make any adjustments, we're going to do a functions check first, which is always our last step when working on any of our firearms, whether it's just cleaning them or modifying them or doing whatever. So we're going to make sure we have an empty magazine. We're going to install that. We're going to make sure that it locks into place nice and tightly, which it does. We're going to release it with a mag release and make sure it falls out under its own weight, which it does. We'll install the magazine, and then as we bring our slide to the rear, the empty magazine, the follower is pushing up on our slide catch. It should lock our slide to the rear, which it does. We can remove our magazine now. I'm going to physically and visually check, make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine, check my breech face, look away, do the same thing again. You can't do this too many times, man. I mean, accidents happen for a reason. It's because people are careless. They think they know the state of their weapon, which you never know. This could have been a loaded magazine over here and I grabbed the wrong magazine. You just can't be too safe, okay? So we are clear and safe. So I'm going to release my slide, pull my trigger. That works fine. Holding my trigger to the rear, I'm going to rack my slide again. Check my reset. That works fine. Pull the trigger. That works fine. I'll pull my slide one more time and then take it out of battery. I should have a dead trigger, which I do. Everything works perfectly fine. So let me show you how to adjust this dual adjustable trigger up. Alright, so the trigger is very easy to adjust. It comes with an Allen wrench from Armory Craft. I'm going to use this long one. So I've already got mine pretty much adjusted up. We have two screws. We have this top screw here, which is our pre-travel adjustment. We got the bottom screw here, which is our over-travel adjustment. You can see how when I back this screw out, it interacts with the frame on my CZ here, and it actually pushes the trigger back. That is eliminating our pre-travel, okay? You can see I got just about all of it out of there. Now, if you go too far, which I'm going to demonstrate here, and both these screws are easily accessible with it in the pistol. You don't have to take anything apart. And then other side note is, before we do any adjustments, when you're ready to do your adjustments, take both screws out, clean them up with alcohol, get all that machining oil and everything off of there, put some blue Loctite on them, and put them back in. That way, when you're done making your adjustments, you're going to let it set for 24 hours, and then they're not going to back out on you, okay? So I'm going to back this out, which is going to over-adjust it, okay? So I just did one turn there. All right, right now I have a dead trigger. Why is it dead? Because my trigger can't come forward far enough to reset. Okay, so that means I got it over-adjusted. So I'm going to push that back. I'm going to put it back to pretty much where I had it. You hear it reset, that click. So now it works as intended. Okay. Same thing on our over travel. I'm going to basically over-adjust this. And then what you're going to see happen is trigger's not going to work. Why? Because it can't go back far enough. So as I hold it back, when I put my Allen wrench in here and I back this out while pulling back on my trigger, at that point where it just fired, that means it can go back far enough now to fire. Okay? And that's right on the hairy edge. I would probably back it out just a little bit more. That way you don't get to the range or wherever you're going and the pistol doesn't work properly. And there you go. That's how to adjust the Armory Craft dual adjustable trigger. Remember, blue Loctite. Let it set for overnight for 24 hours. Give that blue Loctite time to solidify, and then you'll be good to go. And there you go. That's all that's to it. That's how you install a trigger in your CZ75 SP-01. This is the Armory Craft dual adjustable trigger that we installed today. I have plenty of these on my website, sigguy.com, as well as many other upgrades for Sig Sauer pistols, pistol stands, tool kits, all kinds of stuff. So if you haven't checked it out lately, I've added a bunch of new stuff to it. sigguy.com. Also, if you're not subscribed to my YouTube and you like these kind of videos, please hit the subscribe button right down here. I'd really appreciate it. As always, thank you for watching and have a good day.